all the intents and purposes. So diving back in, to sum it up, it really has been a pleasure to serve in these communities, including the city of Boulder, and we look to being the provider for a much longer period of time. We are committed to our Boulder citizens. It's clear in the settlement agreement and in the franchise agreement that we put together here that we are committed to the goals of Boulder, just as we are committed to the goals of each of our communities and our cities and figuring out how we can be there to work with them. We continue to add various resources to our system. I was talking to you some about the Colorado Energy Plan and the outcome of that in 2018. So in September of 2018, it was approved to add 1,100 megawatts of wind to the system, of which this week, like I was saying, 500 megawatts came online officially of a new wind resource known as Cheyenne Ridge. The other 600 megawatts will be online by the end of the year of that wind. Another 700 megawatts of solar and 235 megawatts of battery storage here in the next couple of years as those resources come on. So, it's really an exciting time to add these varied renewables to the system across our state, integrate them into the operations of our system, and also provide avenues for our customers to be able to optimize the way that they use energy in order to marry up with the low carbon energy that we're bringing on the system. But in 2018, in September, we could have sat there and said, this is great. We're going to reach a 60% carbon reduction by 2026 with the approved projects that we have on the plan here and move those forward. We're going to hit 55% renewables in that same time frame. This is all great. It's well beyond what the state's goals are. But we sat down and we took a close look at what was possible and the art of the possible with the existing technologies we have. Granted, there's some continued advancement that needs to be made on software and other pieces, but what is possible by 2030? And we feel that the 80% carbon reduction by 2030 with existing technologies and in a cost-effective manner is something that is realistic for us to achieve. So that's when we announced in December of 2018 that was the goal, and that what we had just finished wasn't enough. We needed to continue pressing forward and looking at what is possible. We were the first utility in the nation of such a size to make that announcement. That announcement not only hit here in the United States, but it also went around the world as far as being able to hit those numbers and what we were able to provide our customers. And that's not just in the state of Colorado, it's across all 8 of the states that Xcel Energy has the pleasure to serve in. Now, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be the same across the board. There's still things to figure out, which is why we're really excited to come to the Electric Resource Plan in March of 2021 and present what that plan is going to look like. Because the proof is in the pudding. We understand our business community, our residential customers, and our communities alike want to see what it is that we are actually doing. It's not enough to say the words, you've got to follow through. And reliability and economics, so affordability, are the key measurements of which we are going to be evaluated as we move forward, not just the carbon reductions that we achieve, but how we get there and what it is that we're doing. You can see all of that in the settlement agreement and in the franchise agreement as metrics that Boulder gets to measure, watch, see, data they get to understand. But more exciting is the energy partnership agreement from my perspective on how we engage. Because it isn't just about the large generation that we have to add to the system to achieve these goals. It's about how you all as customers and how I consume, how my children consume, how my husband consumes this energy that powers our lives, and how we align that in the right times of day in order to make it work. How do we provide higher levels of reliability to customers that need it? Whether that's a plastics or a IT manufacturing facility, a data center, or even a community that might live in a more remote location that may be more prone to the dangers of wildfires. How do we make sure the resiliency and the reliability of the system matches up with what those people need? And so figuring out how do we work with you and through this energy partnership agreement, work closely with the Boulder community on figuring out how do we adopt more electric vehicles? How do we really show how you plan that throughout a community? How do you put more backup, storage, batteries, microgrids? Where can those go? And not only just how do you connect them to and make the physics of the system work, but how do you make sure that the financials and the economics work for all of the people in those communities? That's what we're really looking forward to engaging with the city of Boulder on, because Boulder has proven that they are going to be earlier adopters than other communities. Boulder community is one of the highest adopters of electric vehicles in the area in the state, and it gives the opportunity for us to be able to take the parts of the puzzle that the citizens of Boulder are interested in, willing to adopt, willing to figure out how do you fail, quick fail through those things and figure out how to make it work, and move that to the rest of the state and to the rest of the communities and show examples of how do you really expand that significant carbon reduction across all the communities in our state and potentially beyond. So we look forward to partnering with you all. We look forward to collaborating. We look forward to hearing back from you, particularly through the community governance process that we're putting in place for the Energy Partnership Agreement, and hearing your ideas and figuring out how do we incorporate them into what it is that we are doing so that we can achieve the future faster together. So with that, I look forward to any questions you want to ask towards the end here, but I'll turn it to the next speaker so that we don't take up too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And again, our apologies for the disruption in the Zoom, but thank you, Alice, for picking up where you left off. Next, we're going to hear from our mayor. Mayor Sam Weaver has been somebody who's been passionate about this issue, has dedicated the last 10 years of his focus here as an elected official and engagement in the community on this issue, and has been directly involved in the negotiations to reach an agreement. Mayor Weaver, the floor is yours for some statements and your perspective.
Great, thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for being here. I think one of the first things I'd like to give as perspective is nothing, what we're talking about has changed Boulder's energy future goals. We have a goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030, 100 megawatts of distributed generation in Boulder's footprint, and the 3 Ds and the 3 Rs, decarbonize, decentralize, democratize, and subject to rates, reliability, and renewables. So these are what we're, our guide stars are, and this is what we're going to move towards. And so we know that with Immuni, we could almost certainly have at least the autonomy to be able to address all of those quickly. And if we have a deal with Xcel, a franchise with Xcel, we will have less autonomy. We will be working with a partner, and we will have to negotiate just like we did the agreement. So the deal is not Immuni. The deal has a whole bunch of promising components in the franchise, and Alice touched on some of them. I'll come back to them in a bit. But I think it's a very good deal in the sense that so I've been in negotiations with Xcel. This is my 3rd time. And so I've seen what's been offered in the past, and there was really nothing that we could even bring forward the previous 2 times. This time, when we got down to some of the details and said, this is what our community wants. We want to know that we're going to decarbonize. We want to see your progress towards greenhouse gas emission reduction. We want, what Xcel had as we started these discussions was their 2030 goal, right? That's the state goal that they've adopted. But what happens in between, right? We don't want to get to 2029 and have to do it all at once. And so we were able to negotiate with Xcel some check-in points. And if Xcel is not living up to the promises that they make, and we hope that they will, and we hope that the state will also be part of that, we have the chance to get out of the franchise. And as part of all that work that we did, we really tried to tie up some of the legal issues that have been nagging at everyone. I mean, we've been in litigation with Xcel for years, and we came to some agreements in the settlement that tie some of those off. Substations are an example of something that we tied off. So I want to say what I think is interesting about this. I'll just come out and say I'm not going to campaign on either side of this issue. One of the reasons that I feel like now is the time that we need to be making this decision is because some things have changed. One thing that has changed is the state targets that Xcel is operating under. That's different than it was the last time, 2016 and 17, we had these discussions. Another thing that's changed is COVID, right? So COVID has an impact on what we can expect for our sales tax collection. And so I think, this is a time to ask the community, given the context of, once a century pandemic, do you think that doing this work with Xcel is, a good alternative to the Muni? And I want to hear what the community has to say about that question. So I'm not going to push one thing or the other. I'm going to try and be an honest broker and answer as best I can what I think the elements of the deal are. Tom did a great job of listing out what the specifics are. I want to point to a couple of things. We've talked about a partnership with Xcel for a decade, and it has always looked like not much because there were no guarantees. And further, I think one of the reasons that it was like that is because there wasn't a governance structure that created accountability at the top level of the city organization and the top level of Xcel. And so we've got these three different groups. There's the executive group and the advisory group and then the partnership group. There could be great things come out of this. It could also be nothing, you know, because what it is going to take is dedication on the part of the company and the city. We're going to have to make this happen. It means the 4 meetings of the executive committee every year have to happen. It means that we need to be checking in on our progress. So I think there's great potential in this incarnation of a partnership that wasn't there previously, but it's going to require dedication on the part of both parties here. So I think that's a big deal. I think another big deal is the data sharing. So again, for a decade, we have been trying to get a much better understanding of the way our network operates, our electricity network operates, and we have not been able to get that. And that was something that we were able to work through in this negotiation and discussion. And I think it's worth considering how much more we'll know about how our system operates. Another point strategically that I've been thinking about is Patrick Murphy almost got a muni killing measure on the ballot this year. He certainly will be back next year. And then we finish our current funding in 2022. So to me, there's either going to be an election in 2020, 2021, or 2022. The ones in 2021 and 2022 might be all or nothing. You know, it might be, you know, the measure that was put out there this year was to just stop the muni effort and repurpose the last few $1 million. Well, that's certainly not a very good outcome for $25 million that we've spent on this project. So, you know, the one concern that we've heard is that we want to know all of the details of the condemnation and the stranded assets. Well, we have our opinion, Xcel has their opinion about stranded assets, but we have a basis for that. And also we put a cap on condemnation of $200 million. And that is a pretty darn good, fair agreement, because what we get out of it is all the damages in condemnation, and going concern has been one that's come up over and over and over again as a question mark. And it includes a couple substations and other things that Tom described. So we did not get as much certainty as we could have on the condemnation award, but we certainly know the most it can be within this settlement. And so as we look ahead, if we needed to split up with Xcel because we weren't happy or they weren't happy, then we would start in a position of much better knowledge about what the costs would be. We'd have one question mark, stranded assets. But when I you know, look at that and we look at what we know this year, we know a whole bunch about what we need to know on the costs, in my opinion. And so I think rather than waiting until next year, when we probably won't have any award from condemnation that we can count on, at the very earliest, there would be the first award, but then an appeal. So maybe by 2022, we know the condemnation. Perhaps in 2022, we know the stranded assets. So when I look at Xcel made an offer, we negotiated, the offer's pretty good. I felt like we needed to have the community make the choice in a year when it's either going to be continue with the muni or it's going to be accept the franchise, rather than a year in which it could be continue with the muni or nothing. And so it seemed to me like we know enough this year to proceed with making this decision. None of us have a crystal ball. I can't know whether the franchise will work out great or not so great, and whether the muni would be ultimately successful or not. But it seems like enough things have changed in our context that it's time to hear the voters weigh in on this. And with that, I will stop and be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sam. We also wanted to provide some perspectives that are looking at this issue from different angles. And folks that have been very active on this issue as of late and been very vocal are people like City Council Member Bob Yates, who has been a very strong advocate of the franchise agreement, has participated in those negotiations. And other folks that have championed continuing the municipalization effort are folks like Leslie Glustrom and Steve Whitaker, who are part of the Empower Our Future Sierra Club Coalition. We'll hear from those folks now. We ask 5 minutes each from Councilmember Yates, Leslie, and Steve, and then we'll go to your questions. So again, if you'd like to submit questions on the Q&A, and we'll get to those momentarily, But for now, I turn it over to Boulder City Council member Bob Yates.
Thanks, Andrea. First of all, I want to acknowledge the hard work that has been taken over the last 4 months during these negotiations by Alice Jackson and her team, by our city staff, Tom Carr, and many, many people on our staff team, and most importantly by my colleague, Sam Weaver. Sam has been passionate about municipalization for many, many years. And for the reasons that Sam just very eloquently stated, he saw an opportunity here, and he set aside his personal views about municipalization and was able to see a deal that was achievable and perhaps presentable to our community. So I really admire Sam's courage and his leadership in bringing this forward to the community. He built on a 2016-2017 settlement agreement, which he negotiated and made it much, much better. Let me run through very quickly my David Letterman top 10 reasons why I like this deal and why I think you should like it too. Number 10, litigation. Everybody on this call are big boys and big girls. We understand economics. We understand that money actually does matter. And the city really, quite frankly, has no choice but to settle at this point in time. Alice, I wouldn't have said that to you 4 months ago in the midst of negotiation. I'm going to admit it now. The voters gave us $29 million, excuse me, in which to litigate against Xcel over the last 10 years. We've spent 25 of that $29 million. We're down to our last $4 million. To put that in perspective, last year the city spent $5.2 million in this litigation, and this year we're on track to spend $4.2 million. So do the math. We'll be out of money next year, as Sam indicated, either next year or the year after. We still have many, many years of litigation to fight. The condemnation action was just filed and has been stayed. We haven't even started stranded cost litigation. By my estimate, we have at least 3 to 5 years of litigation still ahead of us, then 3 more years to separate the networks. And that's if everything goes our way. So as Sam said, next year, I think we're going to be forced into one of two situations. Either we're going to be forced to go back to the voters and ask them for yet again more tax money, or someone like Patrick Murphy will simply say, let's just stop this and throw in the towel. So let's get something for it. Number 9, it preserves all of the city's rights. I like this deal because it preserves the hard-earned rights the city did obtain over the last 10 years in the Public Utility Commission, in the separation of assets identification, and resolves disputes around substations and fixes the condemnation prices, Sam said. So in the event that we get back to municipalization, we're that much further along. Number 8, provides a ton of optionality. I like this deal because it allows the city to resume municipalization at several stages. As Tom mentioned, there are 5 exits in the next 10 years, 2022, 2024, 2025, 2027, 2030. We're not locked in for 20 years. It's really a rolling 2 to 3 year contract. Number 7, I like this deal because it enables broadband. Broadband has been sidelined by the Muni. And in this deal, buried in this deal, are commitments by Xcel to allow joint trenching with the city for fiber and electric cables and for pole attachments to Xcel's poles. And it also frees up bonding capacity that the city had reserved for municipalization. So now we are free, if the voters approve this, to go out and issue bonds and build a ubiquitous broadband network, not unlike what Longmont enjoys. Number 6, financial. I like this deal because Xcel commits to pay the city about $3 million a year franchise fees that goes right into the general fund. And they commit to provide $33 million in undergrounding, the first half of which will be built out over the next 5 years. Number 5, partnership. I like this deal because the local input on distribution planning, there's bus electrification, there's microgrids at Boulder Community Hospital and Chautauqua. Tom went through the long list of things that Xcel is committing to, and the city is committing to none of it. One of the complaints I've heard about this deal is we don't know what it costs. I know the answer to that question. It costs us nothing. There is no commitment by the city to partner to spend any money, but there's a commitment by Xcel to partner with us as we choose projects to draw down. Number 4, legislation. I like this deal because Xcel and the city are committed to go into the state legislature, perhaps as early as next year, and eliminate that crazy rule that prohibits businesses and residents from building more than 120% of their need on their rooftop. That rule will be eliminated in the partnership between Xcel and the city, and I think we will be very proud of that. And it reserves all other rights for the city to lobby for more progressive litigation, like community choice aggregation, Edie Hooten's bill last year, which I believe she's going to bring back next year. Number three, I like this deal because Xcel commits to not only 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, but for the very first time, Xcel has provided interim statewide goals on a 2 to 3 year basis, so we can all check in and see how they're doing. This is not just for Boulder, this is for the entire state. Number two, I like this deal because it's our best shot at reaching our goal of 100% renewables by 2030. For all the reasons I stated before about litigation, I think the best case situation with Muni is by 2030, we will be no greener than Xcel will be at 2030, and we will be several hundreds of millions of dollars poorer for it. And number one, my most important reason for supporting this deal is it's fair. I like this deal because it's fair to all. The settling between us was endorsed by Xcel's two largest customers in Boulder, IBM and the University of Colorado. The settlement's been endorsed by Governor Jared Polis. I hope that soon the chamber endorses this deal. And listen, if Sam Weaver and Bob Yates, who have been absolutely the bookends on municipalization over the last several years, can come together and agree on something, I think you should pay attention to that. So I'll just wrap up by observing that it's sad to say that municipalization has been Boulder's civil war. It's divided our community for the last decade. But amidst the worst health and financial crisis in a century, we don't have the luxury to spend endless money and waste time on a fight that has diminishing returns. Our gap with Xcel was very wide in 2010, and maybe it made sense to pursue municipalization at that time. But our gap with them is narrow now, and it's getting narrower by the day. It's time for us to collaborate rather than litigate. It's time for us to bring our community back together. It's time to celebrate what we've accomplished. It's time to work towards our common goal of reducing greenhouse gases and increase renewables. And it's time to take immediate climate action that is replicable, scalable, and meaningful. This is Boulder's Great Green Deal. Let's do it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that perspective. Now we're going to hear another perspective from the Empower Future Sierra Club Coalition. And first up is Leslie Glustrom.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks to everybody who's taken time out this afternoon to think about this very important deal. And with 5 minutes, it's hard to deal with 100 pages of fine print, frankly. But I want to give you some reasons to think about this from a business perspective. You've just gotten several sales pitches in various flavors here. But you're business people, and you know, I think, better than to just buy something on a sales pitch. I often think this is like the car salesman, you know, first of all, there's the pretty lady over the car, and then they show you the great steering wheel and the console. But you would never do this without knowing whether the steering wheel is connected to the wheels, and also whether there are wheels on the car. So given the short amount of time, I'm going to go through a few things that I think are very important to consider. But obviously, I and others in the Empower Future Coalition, Steve Whitaker, who you'll hear from next, are more than happy to spend more time going through these details. And in a minute here, we'll screen share when it comes up. I want to also, while we're waiting for the screen share to come up, there we go, I'm going to just from the beginning, to point out that this is often framed as, well, we can't continue municipalization, so we might as well go back into franchise and try to get something. That misses a very important middle option, which is to stay out of franchise. We're on the verge of both competition coming to Colorado, as well as just dramatic changes in energy. You might think about the telecom revolution and going from typewriters and phones that sat on your desk with cords on them to where we are now with computers and cell phones and everything else that we do. And so, although people who haven't worked with Xcel closely kind of think, oh, we're going to have all these off ramps and there's 1 or 2 in 5 years and everything, but you know, our constitutional right to municipalize was thwarted by Xcel. So those of us that have worked closely with Xcel don't trust that they will honor that. And that's not to say anything about the people. You know, I think a lot of Alice Jackson. I appreciate the progress that the company's made. I appreciate the progress that Alice personally has helped the company make. and her team, which is just such a different team than when we began. So certainly honor that. But when you're a monopoly, your job is to protect the monopoly. So I wanted to just walk through a few of these slides. Hopefully you can see them. They're not going down. They're maybe, I think you can probably see my screen, but you may not, it's not wanting to switch slides, so that's a problem. The next graph would show you Xcel's profits, which have gone up dramatically while their sales have stayed flat. And then the slide after that shows you the back-to-back rate increases that have led to over $500 million of extra revenue coming out of Colorado since about 2006. Boulder's about 4% of Xcel Colorado's load, 4% of 500 million, and that's 500 million more every year. And so that's about 20 million a year coming out of our community, while their load basically stays flat. So the problem, one of the really big problems with this agreement is that it's like a blank check. And there are a lot of things that have not been in that long set of sales pitches. There are a lot of things that were left out. You didn't hear the word coal mentioned. Xcel spent about $1.5 billion on coal plants since the turn of this century. We don't know whether we'll have stranded assets as a muni, especially because we've been out of franchise for 10 years. But you can be basically 100% sure we will have stranded assets if we stay with Xcel. Aha, it decided to wake up. There you can see the blue line is the sales, Xcel's sales in Colorado. The red line is their profits. The green line is their profits inflated at inflation. And you know, this is good business if you can get it. It's important to remember that while a monopoly in a way is a business, they work very, very, very differently than businesses that function in the marketplace. And it's that I would ask you to really think hard about, because we've got competition emerging in Colorado. I can't tell you all the things in 5 minutes, but there are signs all over the state that it's coming. I'll give you some sense of it. There are the rate increases adding up to over 500 million a year in extra revenue. 4% of 500 million is 20 million more a year. We spend about over 100 million a year on electricity from Boulder. And a large part of that, the last time I checked, was about 80% of that comes out of the business community. So this is a very important business decision. The question is, could we do better? It's not necessarily that municipalization is the right answer. For many years now, I've been saying I'm not convinced that municipalization is the right answer, but I do think there are better opportunities. This is the request for indicative pricing that the city put out at the end of 2018. We'll look at the two kind of lines that are colored a little blue just for simplicity. Xcel, we expect to be above 50% renewable by 2024. They were 30% in 2019. You heard Alice say they're adding a lot of wind and solar. So yeah, this is great news. I'm super happy they didn't get there by themselves. We've worked pretty hard on all of this at every level. And the expected cost of that power supply would be about $123 million a year. From these market entrants that you see at the top, things like Guzman and Venergy and AbleGrid and LightSource, there are suppliers ready to bring us much higher levels of renewable energy. If you look at the day one high renewables, the other dark blue line, close to 90, basically 90% renewable energy, saving almost 40 million a year on power costs. So this is the whole story around competition and frankly around not going back into franchise. We can just stay out of franchise. We could stop the municipalization process. There's almost certainly, I believe, going to be laws that change and policies that change in Colorado. Many other Front Range communities will have their franchises coming up in the 2020s. Xcel knows this. This is one reason they're willing to give more than they've ever given before. This is why Mayor Weaver is happy with this. They know that competition is coming, and they know Boulder is at the forefront. So it'll be a very sad day. It'll be one of those, FOMO, as the kids say, when we see Louisville and Westminster and Arvada signing great deals like this, where they have a much higher quality product at a much lower price. And we've gone back into franchise, and those much ballyhooed opt-outs didn't actually work. So again, here's just the bottom line. There's every reason to believe we can get to a much higher level of renewable electricity at a much lower price if we hold out for the competition that's emerging in Colorado. This is just a quick, again, you can't really manage all this, but on the left are the bids that Xcel received at the end of 2017, if memory serves. Over 50,000 megawatts. The graph on the right, Xcel took about 2,000 of those. I arbitrarily threw out half of them, left 25,000. You can see that there's incredible amount of wind, solar storage ready to go, most of it below 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's why we have these market entrants, because they realize that wind and solar now, you can bring it to customers at a lower cost than the existing fossil fuel system that Xcel has invested so heavily in before they kind of saw the light. And so they can bring a much higher quality product at a much lower price. And if you look at what at least is covered up in my screen, there you can get 100% renewables for about 30 million less under that RFIP, the RFP the city just did. We don't know very much.
It interrupt, but we also need to hear from Steve and then try to get to our audience questions. So if you just like another minute or so, that would be good so we can get to Steve.
Excellent, Andrea. This is pretty much my last slide. I appreciate that. As you know, you had a lot of sales pitch talks. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to help your members see kind of the other side of the coin. This is a slide from one of the many PowerPoints that Xcel gives to their shareholders. This was given just last week or the week before to their Western investors. The bottom right, you can see 7.675. That's 7.6 billion that they intend to spend in Colorado over the next 5 years. Piesco is the Colorado version. When Xcel spends money, it's like somebody you're hooked up to having a credit card and going crazy. If they're going to spend that money, they don't just kind of spend it out of the goodness of their heart. They then go to the Utilities Commission, raise our rates. You saw the earlier slide about all the rate increases. So this is the blank check concept. So again, hoping everyone will kind of slow down, hoping that you will recognize that there are many costs of staying with Xcel, that if we have more than 5 or 6 minutes, we can walk through these. And if you have any questions or want to have a brown bag or a virtual happy hour or whatever, feel free to either contact me personally, just be persistent, I'm a volunteer, or come through our website, Empower Our Future. There's quite a bit of information already on our website, and there'll be a lot more in the next couple of weeks. So again, I really want to thank the Chamber for this opportunity. And I ask everyone that's listening to recognize this is a really important business decision. You would never sign any other supply contract with a blank check. And so I ask you to take a very hard look at what's going on. And thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Leslie. And if we could go back to the screen where we could see everybody and get off the slides so we could see Steve. I apologize because of the disruption. We are a little bit over time. But Steve, if you just have a few minutes of what you'd like to address on behalf of the Empower Sierra Coalition, then we can move to our audience questions as they're patiently waiting to be able to pose some of those. Thanks. And Steve, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Thank you, Andrea.
Sure.
I've been a Boulder resident for 47 years. I've worked in 4 Boulder technology startups. I've been a co-owner in 2 and CEO of 1. I've been excited about Boulder's energy future for some time, and from the beginning have supported the effort to create a local, publicly owned electric utility. And I'll tell you why. Business person, I believe in the free market system. It is a system that allowed my businesses to exist and effectively compete with much larger and more established companies. It is the system that enabled my companies to bring innovative products and services to market and to purchase enabling technologies from other companies. It is the competition in the free market system that creates ever improving goods and services that we enjoy. I want the power of the free market system applied more fully to the electric utility industry. Monopolies are the antithesis of free market system. There is no choice, there is no competition, there is no compelling reason to innovate. Boulder has an opportunity to free itself from monopoly control. Boulder can have a local publicly owned utility that can enter the open marketplace to purchase electricity at more competitive rates. There are 29 cities in Colorado with their own publicly owned electric utilities. They allow their communities to bargain for electric power that best suits their goals, and they can get incredible deals. Take Fountain, Colorado, for instance. They have a publicly owned electric utility, the 5th largest in Colorado. They have been purchasing power from Xcel, but now Xcel has been outbid by Guzman Energy, a wholesale power provider. But what is stunning is that Guzman will not only provide electricity to Fountain at a lower cost than Xcel, they will be paying Fountain $12 million upfront for the right to do so. The power of competition. As a further example of the power of competition, the City of Boulder issued a request for indicative pricing from wholesale electric power providers that Leslie showed you. The results were that Boulder could receive electric power from independent power producers with high renewable energy content at a much lower price than what we would get from Xcel. Rates are one thing, but reliability is another. One would think that a large multi-state electric utility monopoly would have better reliability than a smaller publicly owned utility. Not so. Longmont and Fort Collins public electric utilities both have better published reliability than Xcel. In the future, our dependence on electric resources of energy will only increase. Now, virtually all the energy we consume comes from electricity, methane or natural gas, and petroleum. As transportation becomes more electrified, the petroleum energy source will diminish. If we do not act now, in the future, nearly all energy will be controlled by a single monopoly. In a dynamic industry, the future does not belong to monopolies. Just look at what happened to the monopolies in the telecommunication industry. Once that industry became more deregulated and competition was allowed, it was completely transformed. Rates dropped, services expanded, and previously unthinkable products emerged. As good a technology company as the Bell telephone system monopoly was, it would never have come up with the iPhone. Again, the power of free markets, innovation, and competition. I believe that a publicly owned electric utility is the best way forward for Boulder. It will get us where we want to go with lower rates, more renewable energy, faster, better reliability, and local control. And most importantly, freedom to participate in a free and open marketplace. As any business person knows, you want multiple bids from which to make a choice when purchasing. We have just a single proposal before us now from Xcel. The city has only begun to explore deals that include wholesale power providers and financing. It is possible that a deal can be found that will provide both upfront financing that will help Boulder establish a public-owned utility and a renewable energy power purchase agreement. I believe we should vote against returning to the Xcel franchise and further exploring our options. Staying out of franchise does give us options. In franchise, we have few or none. We have been out of franchise for 10 years. Why should we return? If we are in franchise, we will get no deals like Fountain, and we will pay more for electricity than our neighbor Longmont. Let the power of the free market work, stay the course, stay out of franchise, vote no. For more information and to help our citizen-driven campaign, go to empowerourfuture.org.
Thank you, Steve. We have quite a few questions coming in. There are quite a few things said about Xcel Energy. Before we go to the audience question, Alice, is there anything you'd like to respond on behalf of the company, just to clarify anything that may have been mentioned?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and the thing is Andrea, I think it's important for us to move to the questions of the various Boulder Chamber members. As with anything, there's a lot of complexities. Leslie, you have the list right on the rate cases that are filed. The other piece of the puzzle you don't have are what's happened with the fuel costs and what gets charged for fuel versus what gets charged through base and how pieces come together. I know 500 million sounds like a lot to a lot of people. It is a lot. When you take that across our entire customer base, that's less than $170 a year per customer if you're talking about profits. And so just to put things in perspective as far as size and magnitude, I think look at both sides of the puzzle. Let's make sure that we're looking apples to apples in comparisons when we're doing comparisons. And then as far as the pricing goes, along with other things, make sure you're factoring in both capacity and energy, because the prices associated with the company are both. The prices associated with some of the others are not. So you got to make sure you look at both pieces of the puzzle, and it's incredibly complex. But Andrea, I don't want to dig into a ton here. Let's get to the questions that the various members of the chamber have.
Okay, the first question that's coming in, and I will pose it to one of our city council members. You can decide which one would like to answer. But out of the various paths for moving forward, what is a franchise agreement expected to do to the electricity rates of our consumers, both residential and commercial?
I think the franchise agreement keeps us kind of in the same place we are now. If you have a look at how these rates are set, they're set at the PUC. They're not set by us. And so whether we're in franchise or out of franchise, I think our electricity rates are the same. If we have a muni, there's a possibility that 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road, we will be saving a lot of money. The startup costs will be why it takes a little longer. You can play with the financial forecast tool, which I would suggest that business people who are interested in looking at what a muni scenario could look like, there's a big spreadsheet that lets you put in whatever assumptions you want to, and will give you, outputs of how long it will be until we're above water. It's between 2 and 8 years, depending on the assumptions. So I would say that with either staying out of franchise with Xcel or taking the franchise agreement with Xcel, I don't think it's going to have a big impact on our rates. The biggest change in rates would be if there were a muni.
Okay, thank you. Lori, do we have any questions coming in from the chat or the Q&A that you see?
We've had a couple come in a couple of different ways. And so I'll just ask, there are a lot of questions around reliability. And so if we could have a couple of the speakers speak to, what can be expected with each path, so to speak.
Alice, you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Alice,
You can put your...
Yeah, and then Alice, go for it.
Andrea, did you tell me to go first?
Yeah, whichever you choose, but if you'd like, you can go, and then Alice.
Very good, very good. Well, sometimes Xcel expresses their reliability as a percentage. You don't express reliability as a percentage. This isn't a 2-9 game. It's not a 99%. Reliability depends on being in the 3, 4, 5, 9 range. And it's usually measured with metrics that are referred to as things like SAIDI and SAIFI. I'll just talk about the first one, System Average Interruption Duration Index. It's a measure of the outages you have per person, per customer. And since it's outages, lower is better. And I haven't seen Xcel's for Boulder for a while, but typically they're somewhere above 60, sometimes 80, sometimes 90. Longmont is in the range of 30, and Fort Collins is usually below 20. So certainly undergrounding will help. Well, what Xcel learned in the Smart Grid City is that it's actually very difficult and expensive to underground things in Boulder because there's these things called boulders under Boulder. And so they ran way over budget on the Smart Grid City. And they said, well, we didn't know there'd be boulders in Boulder, like, So undergrounding will help some, but one of the things that these agreements don't do is set any targets. We worked with the mayor and others. We finally got them to tell us the community-wide so that it's in a kind of public place, SAIDI and SAIFI and other reliability matrices, but there are no targets. Citizens advocated for Xcel agreeing to meet or beat Longmont's reliability within the next, let's call it 3 to 5 years. That did not happen. So undergrounding will help a bit. If you're in a part of the city that's already undergrounded, your reliability is probably pretty good. If you're in a part of the city that is not undergrounded, your reliability is probably not so good. And so there's kind of two cities here. People, you know, don't always know about the other city. I don't expect it to change a lot, and I'm very sad if the franchise passes and we don't actually have a goal for Xcel to meet, a quantitative goal, not based on percentages. That's not how you measure reliability. So that's a big missing piece of the puzzle. And again, I don't have a lot of faith in the opt-out. So it's a 20-year, from my perspective, commitment without actual commitment on reliability improvements.
Alice?
So first off, I would say the reliability, you all live there in Boulder, so you experience it and you know what it is in your areas. We are quite a reliable system. Leslie, even though it's not percentages, you know, we do measure safety. It is something that's followed closely. Number one, I would say if you aren't familiar with it and you want to look at reliability metrics and the commitments that are out there and actually penalties that are in place, payments that come back to customers, the Public Utilities Commission regulates a quality service plan, which measures the number of outages, the duration of outages for customers. And if we tip over the line on those, we have to make payments back to customers for those outages. That's already in place. It's something that's reviewed regularly by the Public Utilities Commission. And, you know, they watch it closely. It looks at what are known as worst performing feeders for repairs, and those are continuously updated. The additional piece of the puzzle that I would say is going to change fairly dramatically here in the next couple of years is the number of sensors that are being added to our entire distribution system. These are voltage sensors, as well as they are monitoring for various other conditions on the system, which will allow us to restore our customers much faster. It'll allow us to find when there are, you know, preemptive maintenance that needs to be done. And those sensors will all be installed before 2024 in order to give that visibility, whereas before we did not have that visibility. So it's of a benefit not only to the citizens of Boulder, but to the entire system. So those continuous improvement pieces, the addition of new technologies, is something that we're continuously watching and adding to the system. And so you can expect that moving forward, not only will undergrounding be a big part of the Energy Partnership Agreement and prioritizing which areas need that undergrounding first, and that's based off of not only equity of the customer, but also based off of the reliability of the system. That's going to be a core focus of that team, and hopefully we'll be able to get started on that early next year. So a lot of things coming. We have a very reliable system, but we continue to improve in the areas across the state and adopt these technologies to make it even better.
And thank you, Alice. Unfortunately, we have just time for one more question, and then I want to turn it over to John Taylor for a closing statement. But from another Boulder Chamber member, and I'm going to bundle some of the other questions we see coming in on top of this one. They asked, Tom Carr mentioned that the city's looking for renewable electricity while Xcel is measuring greenhouse gas emissions. There are ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions without using renewables. How do these totally different measures get rectified in a franchise agreement? And then as long as we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, another question that's come in is, out of the proposed paths to move forward, what gets us to those carbon reduction goals that we have the quickest? I'll ask either Sam or Bob, one of our city council members, Alice, or and panelists, but these have to be quick answers if we want to end on time. Thank you.
Sam's going to be much better prepared to answer this one, so I'm going to defer to him. Sam, you're on mute.
So this is just a rough rule of thumb, but 80% greenhouse gas reduction corresponds to about 70%, give or take, and Alice can put more numbers on that, about 70% non-carbon emitting generation sources. So they're related, but they're not exactly the same thing. We're controlling on greenhouse gas emissions because that's what's harming the planet. Renewables, we have 100% electricity, renewable electricity goal by 2030, and the partnership will either help us get there or it won't. And I think that's going to be one of the things that would be a discussion of an off-ramp, would be if we're not getting there fast enough, we're not making progress at the state, then that would be a huge concern. But there is a difference between greenhouse gas and percent non-carbon emitting electricity generation. And Alice, if you want to put more precision to that, that'd be fine.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. What I would say is the reason that we focus on the carbon reduction is and not just exclusively on renewables is there are plenty of non-renewable resources in the future that can be dispatchable. Think today, maybe some of the more, say, pumped hydro facilities or other hydro facilities, nuclear facilities, those kinds of things are the existing ones today. That's not what I'm talking about in the future. What we're talking about is like the work that's going on at NREL in order to bring, some more hydrogen production to, let's say, what a normal natural gas facility would be today, to replace the natural gas with hydrogen. So there are ways of getting to zero carbon emissions from the facilities that are dispatchable, and that is something that we're focused on because of the capacity replacement you need on the system for reliability. We can't get to the reliability metrics that you are talking about with the existing intermittent resources that are out there today with the bridge of lithium-ion batteries. There are gaps and there are problems with getting the around-the-clock provision of electric service with the technologies we have available. So continuing to invest in not only the renewable resources that we have and improving those and figuring out how to firm some of those up, but also investing in technologies that are zero carbon dispatchable is truly kind of the nirvana that we are all working towards figuring out how to get to a zero carbon system. And so that's why we've been focusing on the carbon side, is because we have to maintain the reliability of the system. Our customers would not be happy if we didn't do that. It was a topic of the conversation here. And so we have to continue to work on figuring out how do we fill those gaps that still exist in the physics puzzle. And that could very well be in a not a renewable generator, but in a zero carbon dispatchable resource. So that's why we talk about it differently.
Thank you, Leslie. And, I'm sorry, Alice. Leslie, would you like to have a shot at answering that? And then we'll go to John for a closing comment.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. That's very kind of you. Obviously, we're very excited that Xcel, I mean, we remember when they were putting up a coal plant in Pueblo that's supposed to burn until 2070. In fact, that coal plant is still there. And so there are serious issues here. We're very grateful that Xcel is headed now in the right direction. But filling that gap between Xcel and Boulder, we have no idea what the price tag will be, but it's going to cost us under the proposed franchise. It will cost us more. And then I want to return back to that question around stranded assets. Even if we decide that somehow we want to try to do carbon capture on the coal plant, which would never work at any price or scale that matters, you're not going to do it because very likely doesn't have a coal supply. So those fossil fuel plants are going to become stranded assets. And that's one of the many things that these proposed agreements do nothing to protect Boulder customers for. So I want to let your, time go now, Andrea, but thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. And everyone, we apologize for only having an hour and a half. It sounds like Boulder could talk about this for a day and a half or a month and a half or maybe even 10 years. So we are where we are. We're headed towards the ballot. And John, I turn it over to you for a closing statement and wrap it all up.
I sure will. So thank you. I got 2 thank yous and a good fortune comment. So the first thank you is to our sponsors of these events. They make them happen. So Google, WW Reynolds, Zayo, and our partners at BTC. Thank you for making these events possible. I thank our panelists. Absolutely, we're very fortunate, which relates to my next comment, that we have such an excellent, insightful group to deliberate on this type of issue, and that we have such great partners as Xcel, but also our leadership in our activist community driving us toward green energy solutions. They all come together toward arriving at the best solution for our community, and we thank them for their leadership. I thank also all of our participants for staying on. We had that technical difficulty. Somebody who's watching the participant thermometer, we didn't have a single person leave us because of that, which just shows you the intensity with which people are focused on this. And so my good fortune is that I know that this has been a challenging issue for our community. We have the goals that Sam described. We understand that in our community and through our chamber that climate change is a pressing issue for our our community or our globe. We need to be a positive, impactful player in that. This is all part of that. But at the same time, we need to balance serious considerations around reliability, around costs, and who we partner with in that effort. And so we will have the opportunity now, thanks to this, this discussion and the settlement agreement in front of us and the hard work of our council members and Xcel Energy in pushing that forward, to make a decision about whether or not that settlement agreement is the best path forward. And I look forward to discussing that with our business community and weighing in one way or the other on this issue. So thank you all, our panelists, and to our participants for being here with us today. And we'll close it. Have a good one.
Thank you, John.
Take care, everybody.